Well, the fate of President Trump's temporary travel ban is still in question as the liberal Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals takes another day to decide whether to uphold the ruling or strike it down. The court announced earlier there will be no decision today. The president still staunchly defending the need for his executive order. Listen.
It was done for the security of our nation, the security of our citizens, so that people come in who aren't going to do us harm. A bad high school student would understand this. Anybody would understand this. Right now, we are at risk because of what happened.
One of the issues that came up during oral arguments yesterday was whether to consider statements made by President Trump about Muslims while he was on the campaign trail.
We're not saying the case shouldn't proceed, but it is extraordinary for a court to enjoin the president's national security determination based on some newspaper articles, and that's what has happened here.
Stop. This is Judge Clifton. Do you deny that, in fact, the statements attributed to then-candidate Trump and to his political advisors, and most recently Mr. Giuliani, do you deny that those statements were made?
Judge Clifton, no. I would note that Judge Robart himself said that he wasn't going to look at campaign statements.
President Trump thinks the courts need to stop playing politics.
I don't ever want to call a court biased, so I won't call it biased. And we haven't had a decision yet. But courts seem to be so political, and it would be so great for our justice system if they would be able to read a statement and do what's right. And that has to do with the security of our country, which is so important.
All right, KG, we'll do politics in a second, but hearing that back and forth between the Department of Justice's lawyer and then the appellate court judges, any indication on what they may be thinking?
Well, it was interesting because I agree with so many of the legal experts, and I said this last night on O'Reilly, that this line of questioning was inappropriate. They are supposed to examine the executive order based on the four corners of the document. They were bringing up inappropriate line of questioning by saying things like, well, Rudy Giuliani called it this, and, you know, President Trump said this about it. Irrelevant. It's whether or not he in fact has the ability and the authority to protect national security and issue this executive order, and he in fact does. So whether they decide to legislate from the bench is a whole other matter, but this is the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeal. They are well known for being quite liberal, but there's two out of the three that are liberal justices, and there's one that would be termed more of a moderate conservative. So it could split down on a 2-1 decision, but it shouldn't, because he has the authority, and that's quite simply stated in the document.
Yeah, I have that. Here's the document. It's Section 212 of the INA, the U.S. Code 1182. Just give me a second. The entry of any aliens or any class of alien into the United States would be detrimental to the interests of the United States. The President may, by proclamation, suspend the entry of all aliens or any class of aliens as immigrants or non-immigrants, or impose on the entry of aliens restrictions he may deem to be appropriate. Now, Dana, the law seems clear, yet we may get
Section F.
Section F, an appellate court that says no. I'm sorry, Donald Trump, you're not allowed to do that.
And the other thing that, because we're used to getting everything, you know, you press a button on your phone and something happens and your delivery comes, whatever, like this decision is not going to be that quick. The other thing is, this is not even on the merits of the executive order itself. This is on the question of whether there can be a temporary restraining order. So you haven't even gotten to a question. The original lawsuit filed by the state of Washington was on the merits. This hearing was about the temporary restraining order, which, if ruled against the government, they could find another path. And I do think that I wouldn't bring up the candidate statements, but I do think that within that same weekend, when you had Mayor Giuliani saying that he was asked to put together a Muslim ban, that I think that is admissible in terms of looking at. I don't think there's anything wrong with him bringing it up.
It's absolutely inadmissible. It's absolutely not allowed to be brought up. It has no bearing on it whatsoever what Rudy Giuliani or Joe Blow down the street says about it, because it has no bearing on it. It's whether the president has the authority to protect the country as a matter of national security. It said the president shall deem, meaning no one else.
I'm not disagreeing that the president. I'm not disagreeing that the president doesn't have that authority. But even so, I don't know what the ruling would be in a court, but let's say they don't want to use that. There's a reason that on the question of popularity of this executive order, it is now being split because of a partisanship that is unnecessary. The executive order is actually fairly narrow in scope, but you can't even get to that point because you're talking about statements that were made on the record by somebody who said they were advising the president.
All right, let me do a little politics with me, Greg. So if this appellate court does come back and say, no, I'm sorry, Donald Trump, we're going to uphold this stay, then if Trump wanted to push it further, the Department of Justice wanted to go further, it goes to a 4-4 Supreme Court.
It's going to be crazy.
But he could win 8-0. I mean, literally, President Trump could win 8-0, could win on the merits. I believe that, yes.
All right. She answered my question.
There you go.
Sorry.
So let's talk about the fact that Giuliani actually said Muslim banned. He was talking about a Muslim ban. And we're dealing with the most liberal judges
like
since Paula Abdul. These are people that actually said that this ban is harmful to citizens. I mean, they actually believe that. That is the opposite of common sense. The vetting has no imposition, imposes no problems on the citizens. It's garbage. So where does this reaction come from? It comes from the fact that these liberal judges are educated on liberal campuses who now equate national security to oppression. The idea of protecting your family is somehow xenophobic and mean-spirited, that you think that maybe you should have borders and maybe you should vet. Terrorists, in many of these judges' minds, are just another country's freedom fighter, and that we're actually at fault. I think that's where this comes from. It bleeds down from academia, and now we're going to end up having quite a fight at the Supreme Court.
Bob, you know what drives me crazy? This is the Ninth Circuit, right, KG?
Yeah.
There's 10 circuits, 11?
No, well, this is the Ninth Circuit that's in San Francisco.
Right, but I
covers
think there's
that whole
10 circuits, right? So this one circuit, this one area is dictating what the rest of the policy should be for the rest of the country. Meanwhile, there's one in the Northeast that says his temporary travel ban is okay and constitutional.
Well, Donald Trump is about to find out that there's 3 branches of government and that his signature does not automatically make policy or make bad law. The fact of the matter is, I keep coming back to this. The last Yemen who had anything to do with terrorism in this country was 1975. Number one. Number two, if you really want to be serious about this,
and it's not a Muslim ban. Talk to Obama about that.
And if you want to be serious about it, then ban people from Saudi Arabia and Pakistan. They're the principal.
That's why it's not a Muslim ban.
What are you talking about Yemen?
He targeted countries that have no centralized government, that have no government.
Frankly, that Obama administration firstly
Wait a second.
They're failed states.
The people who sponsor this and pay for it are the Saudis, and the people who train are the Pakistanis. Those 2 countries alone are so much more important than these other ones. He picked, this is low-hanging fruit.
Then why did Obama pick it?
But they have a vetting process. There's a difference in that the paperwork and the passport details, all of that stuff, that you can work with the Saudi government and the Pakistani government, others on those things. But if you have a failed state like in Somalia or Yemen or Sudan is another place, I think that it makes sense to put those countries on.
Well, how about Iraq?
Bob,
she's right, and that's what General Kelly exactly said.
That's what I mean. What about Iraq?
Here's the point.
They're on the list.
Iraq is on the list.
They're there, and we control it.
That the Obama administration first pointed out. So if you're going to point a finger at someone having a quote-unquote Muslim ban, look at the Obama administration for that.
It's not a question of the Obama. They're wrong. Well, first of all, they didn't put a temporary ban on anybody from those countries. But the other thing is, what they're talking about is that I understand that there's training taking place in those countries. But I still contend that 90% of the training comes from Pakistan, and we're still doing it. Why? Because we don't want to lose Pakistan as an ally in that part of the world.
But
that's the only reason.
But the United States government can work with a functioning Pakistani government on passport control, and we do have that kind of cooperation.
Well, we could do it with Iraq too. We run the government in Iraq.
But doesn't it bother you that the idea of fighting ISIS is being conflated with targeting Muslims? You would hate that.
Yes, I agree with that. But ISIS was the first group to come out and say they were so happy about this ban, and they were going to use it for recruitment purposes.
Reverse psychology, Bob.
They say that about everything.
No, well, we'll see.
Can we do this? Let's listen to how both sides are arguing their case. Here's the Justice Department's attorney. Listen.
Oh, boy.
In 2015 and 2016, both Congress and the administration made determinations that these 7 countries posed the greatest risk of terrorism. The president determined that there was a real risk. That's why the president determined that the best course was a temporary, it's a short halt in entry for 90 days while these procedures are looked at, and that's understandable. The president comes into office with an obligation to protect the national security of our country.
And now the lawyer from the other side, from Washington State.
In fact, it was the executive order itself that caused irreparable harm to our states, to Washington and Minnesota and our residents. So, of course, we believe that the federal government has shown no irreparable harm from reinstating the status quo prior to the executive order.
What's the irreparable harm to the state of Washington?
We had students and faculty at our state universities who were stranded overseas. We had families that were separated. We had longtime residents who could not travel overseas to visit their families without knowing that they would be able to come back. We had lost tax revenue.
Okay, quick around, Greg. Delays, yes.
He's exaggerating that. We know it's an exaggeration.
The risk of opening up to terror.
How is not a safe travel pause not the sensible assessment after you see what's going on in Europe? Europe wishes that it had done this. Germany wishes it had done this. How is this an imposition on society? It is pure common sense. No wonder these liberal judges don't understand it. They haven't seen common sense in years.
It just drives me crazy. You know that the vetting process to get in here is so strict right now.
I understand.
And all Trump is doing is trying to fulfill a pledge he made to his supporters out there. He has no idea, none. And his I didn't say it, buddy, Bannon is even worse. They sat there and they picked out these countries that are
Bob, you have no proof to substantiate the statements that you're making. And in fact, the President of the United States is privy to the presidential briefings and all the information coming in from the intelligence agencies.
I thought he didn't read
And he also met with President Obama and had multiple conversations with him.
Yeah.
So he is basing that on a set of facts and intelligence reports that he is privy to, and he has an obligation as the commander-in-chief to protect national security interests of the United States. And the countries that are referred to are failed states that have improper, inadequate vetting in place, like Dana said and General Kelly said.
Can we draw a terrorist action?
You know what you're doing? You're conflating two issues. You're talking about the vetting of a refugee program versus what Trump has said, that we need to take a look at what the method that we allow people to come into the country via visa, via passport, for whatever reason, and to close any loopholes that a terrorist, as ISIS has promised, might be able to use.
Loopholes for years?
But it's not the refugee program that you're talking. You're talking about a 2-year vetting process with the refugee program. This wasn't that.
I'm talking about this 90-day stay.
Yeah, exactly. It's a 90-day.
And the idea of a 90-day stay based on some holes in the process is ridiculous.
Why?
It is pure politics.
How many holes do you need for one terrorist to get through? One hole. One terrorist can kill a lot of people.
Came in any of those countries that did a terrorist act.
I think we have had a list of them that we've gone over all day on Fox News.
Right.
My final thought would be, whereas the government might lose in the Ninth Circuit, I believe that on the merits, President Trump will be successful if and when it gets to the Supreme Court.
I'll leave it right there.